from, and rating between 1 to 5. Tell me how you're feeling. 1 is I'm here, I'm chilling. 5 is I am super excited to be here and to learn. Yes, drop it in, drop it in. All right, let's get started. This session, we got people from Washington, from Baltimore, NYC. What to do? Washington D.C. How you doing? Identifying the barriers to diversity and inclusion in my informal education space. This is going to be a super interactive workshop, so please be prepared to dive deep. Let's go to the next slide. My name is OnRaé Watkins. I am the youth education liaison, or excuse me, youth education liaison at the Our Shared Futures, Reckoning with Our Racial Past initiative. I'm also joined by Monica O. Montgomery, racial equity facilitator and curator at the Arts and Industries building. We are so excited to join you all today to chat with you about the important significance of informal education spaces, but also some barriers that we experience in those spaces and how to combat them. Let's jump to our next slide. All right, so I'm going to give you all 30 seconds to answer one of the two prompts. Answer in the chat. 30 seconds. What makes your informal education space unique? Or how can we prioritize informal education spaces? I am going to actually play some original music given to the Smithsonian, the rights given to the Smithsonian to play for this broadcast, for this workshop here and after. So let's take this 30 seconds to answer. We are black, we are strong, our lives matter. We are black, we are strong, our lives matter. We are black, we are strong, our lives matter. We are black, we are strong, our lives matter. We are black, we are strong, our lives matter. We are black, we are strong, our lives matter. We are black, we are strong, our lives matter. All right, that's your 30 seconds. We spitballing it out. 30 seconds. Looks like we got in the chat. My space is a working fish hatchery. Putting kids into the real world is a powerful learning opportunity. We serve kids 0 to 12 years and their families. We are not a play space, but an interactive exhibit. Thank you so much for answering. Let's go ahead and go to our next slide. All right, so informal education spaces. Why? Why are we focusing on them? So in informal education space, our learning environments that normally operate outside of the traditional classroom and curricula. They are not restricted to common core standards or state standards. They normally offer us as the educators in that space the autonomy to be able to build learning experiences that fit our students' interests and needs. Typically, students that join our informal education spaces are there because they want to be there, not because they're forced to be there. Now, you do have some that are sent there by their parents, but I would imagine most of the time they're there because they have chosen to be there. It's voluntary. And some examples are after school programs and clubs, mentorship programs at a neighboring church, podcasting workshops at a recreation center, 3D design intensives at local grassroots organizations, and so many other examples. Now, what I will say is, although these spaces certainly do offer young people the opportunity to participate voluntarily, we do still find ourselves facing situations and organizational structures or protocol that can prevent us from hosting learning opportunities that are equitable and inclusive. And so we are going to spend this time today being able to ensure that we are uplifting the magic of informal education spaces and combating any barriers that prevent equity, inclusion, and diversity in our space. And so what we're hoping to do today is to be able to support you in identifying 4 barriers that impact diversity and inclusion in your education space, explore potential strategies to combat those barriers, create a safe space for us to be able to have conversations authentically, openly, and vulnerably without judgment, and for us to rest in a level of accountability and a solutionary mindset. I'm gonna throw things over to my homie, my dog, Monica. I do also want to say that I have a few of my colleagues from the Our Shared Futures Reckoning with Our Racial Past initiative that will be joining us as well. I will introduce them a little later. But Monica, let's jump it over to you and let's go to this next slide so we can show them what barriers we're going to be discussing today.
Thank you so much, OnRaé. Is my audio okay? Awesome. Well, I'm really excited to speak with you all. And I want to say that I have a background both as an educator of little children, early childhood, 3, 4, and 5. I've taught elementary school. I'm also a graduate professor. So I'm coming from the whole life cycle from the babies to the adults of what can be happening to center diversity and inclusion. And I want to say that this session is going to be about issue identification and how do we break down these barriers that can show up in our spaces, and looking at the bias that fuels the barrier, how it plays out in a harmful way, and what we can do to dismantle it or overcome it, or strategies for solutions. So that is certainly the energy. I also want to just riff a bit off of race equity and the concept of it. I believe that we can commit to challenging harmful practices in our education spaces and championing progressive practices. I believe that we have to hold ourselves accountable to develop a critical consciousness in our approach. And that if we're thinking of decolonizing education spaces and experiences for the children, the learners, the students, that we need to see education as an act of liberation and freedom. So, students, learners, those being educated, they need your integrity and your intention. That commitment to the diversity and inclusion in your work and in the world is what is going to make the difference. And this requires a constant learning and unlearning for us. Oftentimes, when you're the educator, you are the authority, you are the knowledge holder, but there's a lot that we can and should learn, and everyone should be on that journey of lifelong learning. So when we think about environments that are oppressive or marginalizing or toxic. That is the antithesis of what we're going for. And just to give a little definition of terms, diversity and inclusion, I'm going to define them separately. Diversity is all the ways in which people differ, encompassing the different characteristics that make one individual or group different from the other. That can include age, national origin, religion, ability, other ability, or disability, sexual orientation, or gender nonconforming, socioeconomic status, language, neurodivergency perspectives, and of course, race. And in this session, we're speaking mainly about racial equity and thereby diversity. And inclusion, right? What does it feel like to be included? It's that act of welcoming and holding space so people can feel respected, supported, and valued to fully participate. And that is the act of that warm welcome. An inclusive and welcoming space embraces differences and offers respect in words, actions, and deeds for all people. So, my hope is that you can use this session's strategies and recommendations to hold your educational space to higher standards and become a voice for an anti racist framework. And as we go through these barriers, think about these key questions. I'm just sharing out some things to think about before we dive in about how you can evaluate your efforts, especially centering BIPOC students. BIPOC stands for Black, Indigenous, Persons of Color. I will say and give credit, this inspiration for the presentation is coming from Education Week, the American Psychological Association, and many equity trainings and learnings that I have hosted over the years, as well as the participants that I have learned from. So, some questions to consider. Are we intentionally embedding learning experiences that are culturally sensitive and authentic for our students in their instruction? Cultural sensitivity is defined as an awareness and appreciation of diversity between and within cultures, as well as a willingness to adapt one's behavior accordingly. So, what are those values, the norms, beliefs, the characteristics of the culture, and how you can adapt to honor that? So, are we doing that in our spaces? Are we doing that in our instruction? Do our students know that the experience they have outside the classroom has value and purpose inside of the classroom, and how this can be reflected through discussions or multimedia or projects or text selections? How are we honoring that? Also, thinking about, are we embracing this radical spirit of inclusion in our language, shifting away from ableist, racist, offensive, insensitive remarks or colloquialisms, but rather using words that call people in, that center marginalized or under-resourced youth and their voice, and that nuances the narratives of identity, their interests, their points of view within the communities of color. How do we get comfortable with the discomfort and put ourselves in the shoes of our learners? Let's go to the next slide. So white dominant norms is the first barrier that we're going to unpack. Um, And hopefully you can see the screen and what it says. It is a little fuzzy on my end, but I'm going to just invite you to take a moment and read what is there while we talk through some of the issues around white dominant norms. Okay, stay tuned. I see change is coming. Oh, that's bright and clear. Thank you. Okay, and we're going to go to that next slide. Thank you so much. I think we all have a better a better version. All right, I wear 4 eyes, I have glasses, and now I can really see. So white dominant norms, it's explicit and subtle ways that the norms, preferences, and fears of white European descended people overwhelmingly shape how we organize our work in institutions, how we see ourselves and others, and how we interact with one another and how we make decisions. Some people call this the white gaze, realizing that in this country, often whiteness and the white American experience is the mainstream dominant, and everything else is the default and kind of comes beneath it. If we go to the next slide, we can unpack this a little deeper. So, a white dominant norm, right? Fear of open conflict, a white dominant norm, power hoarding, a white dominant norm, paternalism, and I will define that. And when you see the section that says something different, these are some proposed solutions and strategies of how to combat these things. I will say, just speaking about fear of open conflict, there is such this weird energy around conflict, right? Certainly, there are people who are conflict avoidant and don't want to engage in conflict, and that is fair and that is good. But not everyone's always going to get along and see eye to eye. And it is often necessary to have a healthy conversation about where people are, where the divergences in thought, and work through it with honest dialogue. So, oftentimes, that root of white fragility, which is what comes up when people fear open conflict, is what it's about. There's this discomfort with others who are saying something against the dominant norm. They are scapegoated, they are reviled, and oftentimes there's a fear of ruffling feathers. So no one says anything at all. But when we think of white fragility, this is a form of racial violence. White discomfort is dangerous and it causes otherwise reasonable people to lash out in defensiveness or in anger as they attempt to regain their equilibrium. So they are offended and want to maybe cause offense, or maybe they don't, but they tear down everything in their path. It becomes about being a good person and how a white person's feelings are not racist, but they're just speaking plainly. And oftentimes it devolves into a cycle of violence and harm because the person, if they are white, who is afraid of the conflict, who is feeling fragile, again, lashes out at everyone around them and microaggresses and stereotypes and on and on. So we have to come out of this, certainly when we look at the something different section, of using direct and constructive feedback, right? Peers calling each other in and continuously, oh, wait. Okay, sorry, continuously learning from one another. Managers or educators who are skilled at providing timely, supportive feedback in culturally and individually responsive ways. I think it's also about moving beyond discomfort you might have with your students or your learners who are different than you. And if they say something that challenges you, not taking that personally, but realizing that healthy dialogue is part of learning. And there's always going to be some friction in the learning process, but that is normal and natural. Power hoarding, right? Not sharing authority or decision making or important details with those impacted by hierarchy. This happens everywhere and anywhere, certainly in workspaces, but also in educational spaces. Oftentimes, students, regardless of their age, are subject to just being passive recipients of what's happening and not having any choice in determining their actions. And certainly there's this time and a space where educators kind of keep everything to themselves, as well as don't give students options on how they can get involved. So power sharing is the something different. Ideas at all levels are valued for the positional expertise they represent, and the ideas from others are requested in spaces made for them to be heard. So when you think of, hoarding, how do you come out of that? There is a quote by a gentleman named Stuart Brand, and he says, information wants to be free, right? So how do we come out of that hoarding? Try to decenter yourself and your feelings about hoarding or scarcity or lack in the situation, and instead turn it on its ear. Think of, who can I uplift? How can I include? How can I share out? How can we build consensus? How can we elevate and front burner instead of back burner? And thinking about group decisions and sharing. And even again, taking the centering off of yourself, but realizing, if I hold the keys to this or have the attention of these folks or garner the support, or I'm in a position of authority, here are the ways I can share that. So super important to come from that lens. Paternalism, it's the policy or practice of people in positions of authority restricting the freedom and responsibilities of those subordinate to them for their best interest. Very similar to power hoarding. And the something different, the strategy, is partnership. Decision making is clear, affected parties are consulted, evaluations include staff at all levels. There's this activist saying that is pretty common now, nothing about us without us. And that is the heart for coming out of paternalism, how you can mindfully design and assign people, learners, educational experiences that are important, and making sure you don't have implicit bias about the interests or the skill sets of your learners, or you're not tokenizing them based on their racial identity, but giving them full options and transparency. Next slide. When we think of adultification bias, this is a form of implicit bias where adults view Black children as less innocent, more aggressive, more problematic than their white peers who are often the same age. Sometimes Black girls specifically are mistakenly perceived to be older than they are, perhaps because they are larger for their age. But whatever the issue, it's a bias that comes from the eyes of the educator. And as a result, there's a lack of empathy. There's more punitive exercises of discretion of those in positions of authority, greater use of force, harsher penalties. I think that if we, go into the next slide. If we think about adultification bias, this also plays out in the form of banishment. I don't know if anyone has ever been in a classroom or an informal education setting where a student says something contrary, maybe there's a conflict and it's like, hey, you get out. We really have to come outside of that, realizing that students of all walks of life, and especially Black girls and Black boys, need empathy, right? They need protection. They are not aggressive, loud, and mean, despite the bias of how they may be seen, and ensuring that diversity and inclusion of staff are present. So if there is a Black woman or man or gender nonconforming person on staff, they can understand this bias at play and intervene on behalf of the learner, and honoring the lived experience that learner may have, right? Cultural competency training, addressing conflicts with empathy and compassion, and especially here, adopting a restorative justice model or mediation practice, as well as the developmentally appropriate approach. Despite the way a student or a learner looks, consider their age and their stage and respond accordingly. Next slide. And as we go to that next slide, just mentioning that all learners, all those who are being educated, deserve our care and our respect, and that we can't carry our bias into perpetuating further harm on them or to them or through them. We have to come to this space where we are truly engaging our learners with empathy, with compassion, with understanding, and coming out of whatever other beliefs we have that are intervening in a wholesome education process. Lack of representation, simply dominating presence of one race or culture or gender, resulting in barriers to equity, inclusion, diversity, and access for other races. In essence, there may not be enough people of color, students of color present. And so, if we go to the next slide, that can result in microaggressions, tokenization, right? All of these things. So, this lack of awareness and empathy of the cultural and lived experience gets in the way, right? The unwarranted attitudes and stereotypes that affect our decisions, our actions, our understanding towards populations of Black and Brown students in an unconscious manner, and the lack of access that they may have to educational opportunities, all of that is part of a lack of representation. But how we can resolve that, certainly approaching Black and Brown students from a place of building bridges, not gatekeeping, and creating goodwill in the relationships and fostering a cultural understanding. Again, making sure that there are diversity of staff and instructors who can speak to the lived experience and look out for the learners and understand what is at play. Again, cultural competency training, decision makers also reflecting the population being served. And I think just in general, how we can advance a racial equity agenda, if it will, that accounts for more representation and repair in the process. Next slide. The politics of respectability. Some people have said respectability politics, but we're flipping it around a bit. A process in which privileged members of marginalized groups comply with the dominant social norms in an attempt to advance their group's condition. Next slide. So when I think about, respectability, it's almost like, are you doing what you're supposed to be doing according to what society says, right? And that's never fun, and certainly not fun for young learners, or old learners, or learners of any ages. Some of the issues here: unspoken rules that are created and reinforced that uphold the white status quo and suit the temperament of the educator of the dominant culture. Perfectionism is really prioritized, with people who make mistakes being seen of as a bad actor or a bad person, or cast aspersions on their character. No one is perfect, adult or child, and certainly that shouldn't be the standard that students are held to. And even, facial expressions, students who don't smile, and again, speaking specifically about Black and Brown students who don't smile or who not overly polite, they're perceived as disinterested or incompetent or aggressive or unwilling, right? And all of that is, as my mom would say, malarkey, and has to be challenged. So thinking about something different, how do we scrutinize what are the traits we find respectable and why? And that's an internal process. That's something to think through and make sure you bring to your practice in the classroom, a blank slate, if you will, in a spirit of, I welcome all traits, right? All learners are valid and deserve the best treatment and a high quality experience, and I'm not going to hold anything against them. Recognizing that acceptance by the dominant group does not guarantee safety or access to opportunities, and focusing on the underlying issues. I just also want to say that we have to give our learners space for grace and growth and improvement the same way we want that. Let people fail or stumble. Let people have a day off. Let people make a face, if you will, that doesn't have to detract from the educational experience. And we have to realize that we're participating in a system that often upholds white supremacist and racist and undervalues people of color. But we can confront these root causes, and we can get to a manifesting point where the educational experience that's supposed to happen is happening, despite the biases that we may have and society has. And that's really the ethos of being a progressive educator. So I'm going to go to the next slide, and turn it back to OnRaé.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Monica. Oof, that felt so good. It felt so informative. I am enlightened. I hope you all are too. I want you to type in the chat. This is a check-in before we dive into our group work. Oh, people are already responding. How are you feeling? I'm taking it all in. I want a snack. You can add multiple responses. I learned something new. Ready to dive deeper with my comrades, or I have a question. If you have a question, we're going to make sure that we answer them after our workshop. So feel free to reach out to us. We'll make sure that we give you our contact information so you can connect with us. Taking it all in. I see y'all. Nobody said they wants a snack. I think I want a snack. Okay, so look, this is where things get really fun. So what we're going to do is we're going to take some time. It looks like there's enough of us for us to possibly actually stay in a group together. I'm thinking that we might actually break into two individual groups to make them a bit smaller AV team. Um, I would like to allow for you all to use the information that you have learned today in this brief moment that we've had, and being able to apply some strategies to specific scenarios that we are challenging you all to investigate and to think deeply about with your comrades slash your tribe that you are assigned with. So you will be assigned a scenario. If you can go to the next slide, please. You'll be assigned a scenario. You are going to answer the prompt questions that you are given, and then you're going to share out your findings. I want to remind you all that this is a very, it's a space that we want to make sure that we're offering each other a level of grace. These can be tough topics. We want to make sure that we are being respectful of one another, and ensuring that everybody's voice and their thoughts are uplifted and their perspectives are heard. So let's actually, AV team, if you could break us up evenly into two groups, or create one breakout room, and then you can also then leave me in one room. I want to just say that we do have access to a few mentors. We have a few people from the Our Shared Futures Reckoning with Our Racial Past team. We have Arlisha Norwood, we have Dr. Felicia Bell, and Will Chakaritis, who is here with us. So thank y'all so much for joining us. And we are going to go ahead and split us up so that we can get this work started. Awesome. All right, cool. So it looks like, great. It looks like I might need, if I can put Felicia in the room with the other participants. Felicia, if you don't mind going over scenario number 1, that would be really great. If y'all could put Felicia, Dr. Bell in the other room, please. Perfect. All right, and if I can have the ability to share screen, please, that would be really great. All right, can everybody see what's happening here? Awesome. Let me just go to the slide that I want us to answer. Boom. All right. Let me see. I can't see everyone. Here we go. All right. So we're going to take some time to go through a scenario. We're going to explore it. We're going to investigate it. We're going to take a few minutes to come up with some strategies. If you would like to get off camera, feel free. If you're not, no worries. But this is going to be a discussion-based experience. Okay. So I'm going to read through the first prompt. Before we start, I do want to ask if anybody, because we will be sharing out later on in the session, if anybody on this team wants to volunteer to share out on our team's behalf. Don't be as enthused to step up. Just, it's a safe space. We got you covered. We got your back. Does anybody want to step up to share out later? Okay. Well, let's get started. All right, so this is the scenario. Ontaria, they, them, is a Black queer student who has been attending your virtual after-school film internship program for 5 weeks. From week 1, Ontaria shares their excitement about joining the program and consistently displays a high level of participation. On week 3 of the internship, you notice Ontaria has made a new habit of turning their camera off during class time and slowly withdraws from their normal enthusiastic participation. On week 5, Ontaria asks for a private meeting with the program coordinator. During the private meeting, Ontaria shares their frustrations about continuously being misgendered by the program's instructors and participants. They offer a handwritten letter that details their concerns and informs you that they will be withdrawing from the internship program. To properly address the situation, you share the details of Ontaria's concerns with senior staff, along with a few suggested strategies to solve the issue. 4 days after your meeting with senior staff, your director requests for you to offer Ontaria a $250 gift card with a signed thank you note and requires for class instructors to cease all communications with Ontaria to prevent potential legal concerns. I want y'all to just take a few seconds to reread through that a little if you need to. I want you to take a few seconds to take this scenario in. And my first question for the group, since this is a group discussion, my first question for the group is, what is your immediate response to this situation? What is the first things that come to mind? How do you feel about what you've read, about the situation? What is the first thing that comes to mind after hearing about this situation?
I feel horrified by the director's response. But also not surprised at the lack of sensitivity with the pronouns and the misgendering and all that. I think that's pretty common for that to happen, unfortunately.
Anyone else? Feel free to share. This is an open space and open discussion. It's going to take for us to strategize together to figure out how to navigate through situations like this that happen in informal education spaces. Anyone else want to share their immediate response to this scenario? And I don't mind waiting if you need time to respond. Okay. So let's actually jump into the questions. So I want you all to think about it. Thank you for sharing earlier, you all. I want you to think about the barriers that we discussed. And I have the presentation up, so if we need to go back up to a few, we can certainly do that. I believe that you all were offered a fact sheet. If not, I can drop that in the chat for you all to reference, which gives you a little bit of a deeper dive into a few of the barriers. But I ask you now, what barriers do you believe are present in this scenario? Based on the barriers that we named, what barriers do you believe are present in this scenario? And let me go back up to it so y'all can take another look. And if you remember, we talked about lack of representation, we talked about white dominant norms, adultification bias, and politics of respectability. What is the barrier or barriers that are present in this scenario?
Definitely a lack of representation, right?
Okay, do you mind sharing why, Will?
I would feel if there had been more representation, if there were more representative students who reflect Ontaria's backgrounds, there might be a higher level of comfort in turning on the camera, having solidarity with other students, to that end.
Okay, perfect. I think that's an excellent answer. I do want to also just make sure that we uplift that these scenarios that we're presenting are certainly intersectional in the sense that there isn't normally one barrier that is present. It's typically more than one, if not all. And so I wanted to just make sure I uplifted that. Does anyone else have a response to offer about the barrier that they believe is existing in this scenario?
I was going to say white dominant norms, although it's not necessarily clear to me that this has as much to do with race, although the student is identified as Black, nobody else's race is specified. But certainly with dominant norms, as I said in my previous answer, I think it's still, there's a sort of shift in mindset that has happened very gradually in our society about people having different pronouns and getting used to using those. And obviously the norm is calling people who present as male, he, him, and calling people who present as female, she, her. And if, there's somebody who kind of falls in the middle or you're not sure about, it's still, I think it takes practice to use they, them, because it's not what we're used to doing, and that it's not the norm. So I think that certainly is one that would factor in this scenario.
I also wonder, which is going to be my next question, how do you all propose that this situation is reconciled? And I also want to bring this bit up, which I'm surprised that no one has mentioned yet, but an avoidance of conflict. If you notice early on in the scenario that Ontaria actually begins to start to turn their camera off early in the class sessions. And what is not here is whether or not that was addressed. It was certainly something that was noticed as abnormal behavior, but it wasn't addressed. The other thing I want to make sure that we draw back attention to, one of you all had already mentioned it, is the response by the director. Avoidance of conflict, not wanting to address the issue with Ontario directly, but indirectly via a $250 gift card. And so I want to go back to our questions. What solutions would you explore to overcome the identified barriers? I want you to think about this from an individual perspective as well as an organizational perspective. So when I say organizational, I mean, how could you make some shifts as a staff and or as an organization to be able to reconcile? And this doesn't have to be anything that we have proposed earlier. This could be something that we work through together and create on our own as a group. But I wanted to check in with you all to explore some strategies or solutions that we could implement to overcome the barriers that we have expressed is reflected in this scenario. What are some solutions that you all would implement?
It definitely sounds like the staff needs some training, some kind of professional development around these issues. But I also think, obviously this is a hypothetical scenario, so not knowing how realistic this might be, it seems like it might be instructive to meet directly with Ontario and hear, for like the senior staff to hear their concerns first person. I just felt like it was not only avoiding conflict by offering the gift card, but it just seemed so dismissive, so sort of dehumanizing almost, that was the way they dealt with it. And so I think, maybe trying to understand their perspective a bit more.
Okay,
to move forward.
Okay, so you're suggesting for Ontario to meet with the senior staff and to be able to share their concerns?
Well, I mean that, depending on, as I said, it's tricky to say what would work in a situation where it's hypothetical and we don't know people's perspectives. But if that were something that Ontario wanted to do, I mean, we wouldn't want to put undue pressure on them to, be reliving the trauma or whatever, having to put themselves in an uncomfortable position because of other people's lack of sensitivity or awareness. But it just seems, I think it's always helpful to bring people further along in these conversations to hear more directly from the people that their behavior impacts.
That's bold. That's a bold move. It's not outrageous, but it certainly is going to take a bold organization who's willing to hold themselves accountable. But I think that that's an excellent idea. Anyone else? We had mentioned, at least our group had uplifted lack of representation. I think that's a pretty obvious one, right? Will, what would you say is your suggestion in that regard?
Yeah, Travis mentioned it in the chat, but definitely needs some training here systemically to resolve this problem, right? Travis mentioned leadership training, inclusivity, empathy, difficult conversations training. I agree with that as well. Trying to, and I know this isn't what Maureen was trying to say necessarily, but trying to take some of that onus off of Ontario and them themselves.
Okay. Yeah, I think all of these are really great solutions. I want us to take a moment to affirm ourselves for being able to strive through this scenario and to think through some of the solutions. I know it feels very much put on the spot, but these are some of the conversations that come up in situations that happen in really any education space, but certainly informal education spaces. And so I'm happy that you all have problem solved through to be able to come up with some feasible solutions to consider to ensure that when these situations are faced, that we have methods to be able to reconcile. Are we all feeling good? Perfect. All right, cool. Well, let's actually allow for folk to come back into the room. AV team, if you don't mind bringing everyone back in, let me stop sharing the screen so I can see your beautiful faces. looks like everyone is coming back in. Awesome. I'm very interested to hear what everyone else was able to come up with for their scenario. Travis, I'm so sorry. I'm looking at your chat now. I wasn't able to view it when I was sharing screen, but yes, leadership training. Hey, okay, looks like people are back. So I'm gonna put y'all on the spot. I'm gonna put y'all's group on the spot first. We only have a few minutes, so I want to give us just a couple minutes to go through our scenario and our strategies. We have about 6 minutes, so let's try to keep it very quick. Monica, y'all team.
Yeah, let me just say something really quick. Some members
Sure.
of our team didn't get the handout, the worksheet. So if that can be sent to them somehow from the powers that be, that would be great. Or if there's a way to drop a link in the chat, that's helpful. I don't want to dominate space. Did one of our other moderators or presenters want to share about what we talked about? Well, I can do a little recap and y'all can jump in. So we talked about the scenario in the art gallery where the two young women were greeting people enthusiastically, loudly as they came in, and they were asked to try to greet a little quieter and lower their voices because visitors were complaining they couldn't enjoy the art with their ebullient, loud voices. And then it was later found out that these complaints came from white visitors. So one of our participants noted this is white dominant norms and how oftentimes certain things are acculturated into us and we externalize what's happening, saying, it's not you, it's not me, it's you, here's what's wrong with you. But we need to be trained different and recognize how we've been trained and come out of that comfort zone to honor other experiences. And then I also added in, this is respectability, politics of respectability, and kind of how these unspoken rules are at play. And we just had a nice, lively discussion about that.
I would also call out adultification bias. This idea that Black girls are loud and mean and disruptive as well. Just as a unfortunate quality that's placed on them, or stereotype rather. That sounds amazing. Thank y'all so much for that. For our team, does anybody want to share? I think Will wants to share. Do it.
Okay, you got me. So yeah, we went over scenario 4 involving a student who's Black and queer, Ontaria, who identifies as they, them for her pronoun or for their pronouns. And they were at a virtual after school film internship, and they were very enthusiastic about the program and the course, but they started to turn their camera off during class time and began to withdraw. And Ontaria asked for a private meeting with a program coordinator during the meeting and was sharing their frustration about being misgendered consistently by the instructor and by participants. And they offered a handwritten letter even detailing their concerns. And the outcome was the senior staff suggested strategies to solve the issue. 4 days after the meeting, we get a $250 gift card offered to Ontaria with a signed thank you note. So, and a requirement for the class to cease their communication with Ontaria as well. So, yeah, someone else take over here.
Okay, so that was a pretty layered situation or a layered scenario. And so our group came up with the barriers that were reflected in this particular scenario as being a lack of representation. We don't have, this situation did not offer any instructors, senior staff, or really anyone in the space that was that had a similar lived experience as Ontaria, that identified similarly to Ontaria, or really understood the intricacies of what it means to be Black, queer, and even non-binary. And so having someone in the space or individuals in the space that are culturally aware of what it means to be non-binary would be super important. And so we talked about a lack of representation. We also talked about an avoidance of conflict, because the director did not want to address the situation with Ontario directly, instead decided to send Ontario a $250 gift card and say, hey, thank you so much for your participation. Avoidance of conflict is a white dominant norm. And so those were the couple of barriers that we identified, as well as some of the solutions we talked about, if I remember correctly, was certainly the leadership training, being able to address the situations at hand, bringing Ontario back in to actually have a conversation with the senior staff to share what their experience was, which I think is a very, very bold move, but also very necessary. And also obviously bringing people into the space and allowing for people that are in leadership roles to be reflective of the people that are that we are serving. In this instance, people that are non-binary. But I am so appreciative. We only have literally a minute left. I'm so appreciative for the time that you all offered today, and for brainstorming with us, for problem solving with us. You have learned about 4 barriers that impact informal education spaces. There are so many more. We thank you so much for participating. My name is OnRaé. I got my homie Will. I got my homie Arlisha, Monica, as well as Felicia that have been here today to support. I thank you so much for joining us. And I hope you enjoyed the rest of your educator day. Dive into some amazing sessions. And be well, be blessed. Appreciate y'all.